Hey guys, welcome to week 3 of John's Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm John. I'm happy to have you guys here. And yes, week 3 is tomorrow. I'm super excited. I hope you guys won your matchups in week 2. Hopefully you guys are 2-0. And if you're not, I'm glad that you are here for some fantasy advice, because in this podcast, I'm going to be talking about some buy low players and some sell high players for week 3 of the fantasy football season, because a lot of you guys, either you're 2-0 and you're pretty comfortable right now, or maybe you're 1-1, maybe you're 0-2, and you're looking to see what you can do. What trades can I make? What moves can I make with my roster to improve my team as soon as I can? Because some of the players that I drafted aren't performing like I think they should. So I'm glad you guys are here, and I hope you guys tuned into my live show last week. My weekly picks weren't too great, but my weekly sits did do really well. Technically, I guess all of the players I chose got below their projection, but I'd give it a solid 3.5 out of 4. So that did really well. And I'm looking forward to you guys tuning in tomorrow, because I have a great show planned. As always, 11:45 a.m. Eastern Time every Sunday for an hour before the game starts. Definitely tune in for the TikTok Live. And I also want to mention the Patreon as well. If you guys want me to answer your questions, if you have specific questions about your team, your roster, making trades, or who you should start, and you can't get enough advice in this podcast or on the live, then feel free to message me on the Patreon. Go to the link in our bio on our TikTok or Instagram, and the Patreon link is right there. You could sign up, and I'll basically answer all the questions you want. But let's get into this podcast. I'm going to give you some buy low candidates first. I have one quarterback and one tight end that I think you could buy low on right now. And then I have 5 running backs and 5 receivers that you could buy low on right now if you want to make some moves for your team. And I'll give some reasoning behind it, but it'll be up to you guys to determine who you actually trade for these players. And if you want some advice on that, definitely head over to the Patreon to do that. And make sure to come back next week, because next week I'm going to be talking about what you should do with some of the top tier players that aren't performing well. We've seen Derrick Henry really hasn't popped off. Dalvin Cook hasn't. Alvin Kamara hasn't. And what should you really do with those players? So after a 3-week sample size, next week, next Saturday, I'm going to be talking about all those players that haven't been performing and what you should do with them, whether you should wait or trade them away. So getting right into it, quarterback. Tom Brady is the quarterback that I think you guys should buy low on. He's had pretty tough matchups in week 1 and week 2, been pretty unlucky with injuries as well. In week 2, Godwin didn't play, Evans got kicked out of the game, and the Saints usually play the Bucs tough, so Brady only ended up with 9 points. He was one of my weekly sits for the week, so he didn't have a great game. And this week, he also probably won't have a great game, to be honest. Evans is suspended, Godwin's not playing, and Julio's banged up, Gage is banged up. I mean, they have a lot of players that are injured. It's going to be a tough game, probably low scoring, but if you want a quarterback that you want to target, if you have Dak or Lance, or you have a quarterback like Russell Wilson who hasn't been performing well, you might want to target Brady, because he has great matchups as the season continues. It's just right now that he's struggling because of injuries and matchups. So if you want to do it now, or if you want to wait until after tomorrow's game, I think that would be fine, because I don't think Brady's going to have a great game tomorrow. So early next week, definitely reach out to your teams in your league who has Brady and try to make a deal. Try to talk to them about how they like Brady and if you can get Brady from them. In terms of running backs, McCaffrey, who had 16 points in week 1, 17 in week 2, I think he's a good candidate for buy low. A lot of people might be worried about him. He's been on the injury report, and he really hasn't been too great so far, 16 and 17 points, but the Panthers have struggled overall. So I think they'll get better. Baker will get more comfortable in the system, and McCaffrey's matchups will get better. He's another guy you probably want to wait to trade for until after this week, because he plays the Saints this week, so he probably won't have too great of a game, and then early next week you might be able to get him at a lower price. Another guy is Austin Eckler, one of those top 5 running backs you probably picked in your draft, or if you don't have him, you might be able to trade for him, because he got 11 points in week 1, 18 in week 2, and a lot of people were concerned about his usage, but he actually still led the Chargers in snap share for running back. So I still like Eckler for the rest of the season. 11 points and 18 points is low enough where you might be able to target him. And this is a guy where I'd probably do it sooner rather than later, because he plays the Jaguars tomorrow, so he probably will have a pretty good game, over 15, probably over 20 points to have his best game of the season so far. Another guy is Javonte Williams. Yes, he's splitting time with Melvin Gordon, but it's more of a 65-35 split for Javonte Williams, which is good. Week 1, he had 20 points, most of that due to his 11 receptions in that game. The second game, 9 points, which isn't as good. And this is a guy who I think you should trade for early next week. Wait until after the game tomorrow because they play the 49ers on Sunday Night Football. 49ers have a great run defense, so I don't think Javonte is going to hit his projection. So he's a guy that you could definitely trade for early next week and maybe get at a lower price. Another guy is Cam Akers, 0 points week 1, 8 points in week 2. I still like him to be the starter for the rest of the season. Henderson is still there, but I think Akers is going to continually increase his snap share and take over that starting role. I mean, he had 0 points, 0 fantasy points in week 1. Week 2, he comes back and out snaps or out carries Henderson, 15 carries to 10 carries. So I like how McVay is using him. He got Akers and Robinson more involved this week, which I like. And another guy, Dameon Pierce, I talked about him in the preseason and I really liked him and I still like him. I mean, he's had a rough couple of weeks, but Lovie Smith keeps talking about getting him the ball even more. He had 5 points in week 1, 9 points in week 2. And Lovie Smith is like, we still need to get him the ball more. He plays the Bears this week. I don't think this is his breakout week, but it could be the next week against the Chargers, who don't have a great run defense. We saw that last season as well. So Pierce is one of those guys you could probably get at a really low value because the guy that has him is probably even considering dropping him at this point. As for wide receivers, Keenan Allen, he was limited all week in practice. We saw him get injured in week 1. He's a guy you might be able to get at a low value. If you have a guy like Curtis Samuel, who's gotten a lot of points both weeks, I'd be fine with trading Curtis Samuel for Keenan Allen because we trust Herbert more than Wentz for the rest of the season. Wentz has done well so far, but he's had some great matchups to deal with. So I like Keenan Allen more than Curtis Samuel for the rest of the season. So that's an example of a trade I would do for Keenan Allen. Deebo Samuel as well, 13 points in week 1, 15 in week 2. And now that Elijah Mitchell's out and Garoppolo's back under center, Kyle Shanahan's going to have to go back to that playbook that he used last season and throughout the playoffs where Deebo went crazy. And he's going to have to implement that again because if they want to win any games, Garoppolo's there. They're going to have to use Deebo. So I like Deebo. If you can get him, that would be great because he's a top 10 guy for the rest of the season for me. And then the other two that I have 3 more, but 2 of them are Bucs receivers. Evans and Godwin, I think, are great buy low players. Remember, Brady had a great season last year, and he threw to a lot of different guys. Brown was there, Gronk was there, Evans, Godwin, and this year, Brown is gone, AB's gone, Gronk is gone. It's going to be Evans and Godwin. And Brady really hasn't got into a rhythm yet, but he will. Trust me, mid-season, he's going to get into a rhythm. Target Evans while he's suspended. Target Godwin while he has that hamstring injury. Don't go crazy giving up like Stephon Diggs or Tyreek Hill, or I would probably keep Waddle because that Dolphins team looks great, but give up Curtis Samuel. Give up Curtis Samuel and like Lazard or something like that, or Brandon Cooks for one of these guys because these guys are going to be great throughout the whole season. And actually, I just mentioned Lazard. He didn't play in week 1. Week 2, he had 3 targets, 2 catches. He scored a touchdown. So I like Lazard to be the number 1 option in Green Bay. I still want to see more of him, but I think he's a good buy low option. Again, don't give up too much for him, but if you want to give a flex guy or a bench guy for him, I would definitely do that. And then the tight end I'd be targeting. You guys probably hear me talking about this guy all the time, but Dalton Schultz, I still like. A lot of you might be worried about him. He actually had 13 points in week 1. He was projected 12, so he did better than his projection, and that was with Dak. Second week without Dak, he only got 1.8. He did get that catch, but had a fumble, and then he did get hurt. So I don't think he's going to play this week against the Giants, so I would start somebody else. But I do like Dalton Schultz for the rest of the season, which is actually perfect for you guys because if you're looking for a tight end and you don't want to deal with Cole Kmet's problems or all these other tight end problems of switching guys in and out, go get Dalton Schultz right now because even before Dak comes back, I think with Cooper Rush, Dalton Schultz could still get to his projection. And then when Dak comes back and Gallup and Lamb are there taking attention away from Schultz, I think Schultz is going to have a great season. So definitely target him in your trades as well. And now I have some sell high candidates. Some guys have been doing really well in the first few weeks of the season that I think you should trade away, and you could probably get some really good players because I think these sell high players won't be doing too great for the rest of the season. I have one for each position. I'm going to start with the quarterback. I mentioned him before, Carson Wentz. He had 29 points in week 2, 30 points in week 1. He did have great matchups, though. He played the Lions and the Jaguars, so I mean, that's as easy as you're really going to get for defenses. So I don't think Wentz is going to have a great season overall. And I think those 2 games are probably going to be 2 of his top 3 or 4 games all season. So if you have Wentz, I would try to trade him away. I mean, you might be able to get a guy like Tom Brady, who's a buy low. You might be able to get somebody like Kyler Murray, who hasn't really been good. He did pretty well in week 2 with that comeback, but when DeAndre Hopkins comes back, Rondale Moore comes back, Kyler's going to be even better. So if you could trade Wentz for Kyler or Wentz for Brady, honestly, I would do it. And especially if you have Evans or Godwin, that'd be a good trade for you to stack that Brady and Evans or Brady and Godwin. And then a running back is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He had 22 points in week 1, 16 points in week 2. And we saw the Chiefs game in week 2. And we see the Chiefs, and Mahomes has been saying it, that every week it's going to be a different guy for the Chiefs. And I don't like CEH's chances to be that guy more times than not. I think it's going to be Kelsey. And I mean, to be honest, last game, Jerick McKinnon had 47% of the running back snaps, and Edwards-Helaire only had 44%. So how could you have a guy 22 points in week 1, 16 points in week 2? That's great. That's an average of like 18.5. That's great, but I don't think he's going to, that's actually an average of 19, but I don't think he's going to have a great season the rest of the year. So if you could trade him away and get one of the running backs I mentioned earlier, if you can get Javonte Williams, maybe wait until after this week. But if you could trade CEH after this week for Javonte Williams, that's a big win for you because Javonte, I think, is going to be better long term. And on wide receiver, he's also part of the Commanders. It's Jahan Dotson. We saw him get 2 touchdowns in week 1, 18 fantasy points. In week 2, he also caught a touchdown and a 2-point conversion for another 18 fantasy points. I would try to get rid of him now. If you can get rid of him and get somebody like Godwin, that'd be a steal. I mean, that'd be great. The guy that has Godwin might be fed up with his injuries. The guy who has Debo might be fed up with how they're using him. I mean, I know that sounds crazy, Dotson for Debo. Who would do that? Reach out to the teams in your league. Maybe you could give them Dotson and maybe another bench player, and then you can get Debo or you can get Godwin. And even if you were to do it for Akers or Pierce, I mean, you could probably get that easy, giving up Dotson. And Dotson has had great matchups, Lions and Jags. I don't think it's going to be that way the rest of the season. And then for tight end, a guy that I've been talking about a lot recently, especially this week, is Gerald Everett. I think he's a sell-high candidate, but not yet, not today, not right when you're watching this video. I think after tomorrow's game, he's going to be a perfect sell-high candidate because the reason I'm telling people to start him this week is because Parham got limited practices all week. He's probably not going to play, and if he does, he won't be a big part of the game plan. And Keenan Allen, same thing, limited all week. If he plays, he won't be a huge part of the game plan against the Jags, and the Chargers should be able to move the ball. So I think that Everett's going to have some opportunities. But then after tomorrow's game, Allen will be back probably to full strength, and Parham will be back taking snaps away from Everett. So I would start Everett tomorrow probably. I think he'll get to his projection. He scored a touchdown both week 1 and week 2, so he could get a touchdown again tomorrow. But in terms of after tomorrow, I would look to move Everett. Find a team in your league that has a tight, maybe they have Dalton Schultz. If after tomorrow, I'd love that because Dalton Schultz probably won't play Monday. You could give the guy Everett and get Dalton Schultz back, and I'd love that. And even if you have another tight end, or even if they don't have Dalton Schultz, but they want a tight end, they have Cole Kmet, or they have somebody who's not been performing, I'd be fine with you getting a flex guy, giving up Everett for a guy like Akers or Lazard, who has high upside that you could use in your flex. That'd be awesome. So just be mindful of these candidates that are buy low and sell high. And like I said, next week, I'm going to talk about the top tier players that aren't performing and what you should do with them. So if you have guys like Derrick Henry, or maybe Eckler doesn't have a good week, McCaffrey doesn't have a good week, maybe Debo has another bad week, Derrick Henry, I just mentioned, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, I think could have a good game, but there's a lot of top tier players after week 3 that you guys are going to be panicking about, and I'll tell you next week what you can do with them and what you should do with them and what trades you can make. So if you guys have any questions about these buy low players, sell high players, like what exact trades you should make, definitely head over to the Patreon. Link is in the bio for Instagram and TikTok. And head over to the Patreon so you can ask me those questions and I can help you improve your team. But this should give you a pretty good guideline of what you should look for and what you should talk to your teams in your league about. Ask them, reach out, see how they feel about their players, and then extend a trade offer either today or maybe after this week. But thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate you guys being here, and hopefully I'll see you guys tomorrow on my TikTok Live. Good luck this week.